myself if people turn their cameras off and stuff. So I don't know how y'all feel about that. You know, it just doesn't bother me. So if y'all want to do that, as a matter of protocol, just that's fine with me. So just wanted to mention that.
Thanks.
I watched the YouTube video of the last meeting. I just, as much as I was fidgeting and moving around, I was making myself sick. So if y'all want to turn your cameras off, doesn't bother me. So.
All right, thanks, Zach. That's good advice and a suggestion we may take advantage of. Well, let me go ahead and open the meeting. Call to order the meeting of the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee. And I'll ask for a self roll call. Introduce myself. I'm John McGlennon, a member of the James City County Board of Supervisors, chairing TSDAC and representing the Virginia Association of Counties. Cindy?
Good morning, Cindy Mester with the City of Falls Church and co-chair and representing VML, the Virginia Municipal League. And it's great to see you all virtually on a rainy day. I'm not disappointed for not having to drive to Richmond, I have to admit.
Kate, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. So I'm Kate Mattice. I'm the Executive Director of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. I sit on TSDAC representing the Virginia Transit Association.
And I don't have everybody in front of me, so any other members of TSDAC could introduce themselves, please?
Brian Booth is here, sir.
Okay, Brian.
Good morning. I'm Brian Booth. I apologize. My camera is not working this morning, and also my audio, so I had to dial in. So I'm the one on the rogue phone number. But I am the director with Blacksburg Transit, and I serve on the TSDAC committee as the representative for CTAB, the Community Transportation Association of Virginia.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Anyone else from TSDAC here? Doesn't sound like it. How about Zach? Do you want to have the staff introduce themselves as well, maybe? And I see Jennifer is here as well.
I'm happy to do that, sir. Grant, if you want to go ahead, Grant, Dan, then Jen, if you want to step in, and Andy and all that good stuff.
Morning, Grant Sparks. I am the Director of Statewide Transit Programs for DRPT.
Dan, you out there?
Yeah.
Oh,
Sure.
Dan,
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry about that. My camera was on delay. I'm Dan Sonneklaar. I'm a manager, statewide transit planning manager here with DRPT.
All right, Zach, you want me to go next?
Okay,
Yeah, sure.
I'm Jennifer DeBrule. I'm the director of DRPT for about 68 more days.
But who's counting?
But who's counting?
And Andy, if you want to mention your team too while you're doing this, if you want.
Yeah, I'm Andy Wright. I'm Chief of External Affairs and Strategic Initiatives for another 15 years. And joining me today on my team, running the back end of this meeting, is Miriam Foster, our Senior Creative and Marketing Specialist. So if you ever see any of our creative work out there and ads, Miriam's the person behind that. And then we also have Jayla Parker, who is new to DRPT, who handles all our media relations and odds and ends with communications and social media.
Great. Okay. Anyone else joined us since we started?
Like Mr. Dyke is just joining, so you may have a quorum,
great.
sir.
Excellent. Hello, Jim.
Hey, how are you?
Doing fine, thanks. We were just asking everybody to introduce themselves around so folks knows who's on the call.
Jim Dyke from Reston, Virginia, former Secretary of Education.
All right.
Thank you, Jim. All right, well, let's go ahead. Now that we do have a quorum, the next item of our agenda is the approval of the August 29th, 2023 minutes. Does anybody have any correction or amendments they'd like to make to those minutes? If not, do I have a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
And second.
Cindy.
Motion to approve and seconded. And any objection? Hearing none, we'll count those minutes as approved. Okay. And now we're going to get an update from the General Assembly. Andy, I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Why don't I just go ahead and share my screen? So I have the slide deck up here in front of me. Can people confirm that you all can
Yep.
see the deck?
I can see it here, and I've got it on my other screen over here as well. So
Okay, great. So thank you again. This is my annual visit with you all every April, March to give you all a recap of what's happened in the General Assembly. So this was a long session, 60 days. A very unique session. I'd probably say that every year though, but this more unique than others. After a couple of years of House of Delegates controlled by the Republicans and Senate controlled by the Democrats, we had Democrats controlling both chambers by slim margins, 51-49 in the House, 21-19 in the Senate. But we had a significant number of office holders who were first-time members of the General Assembly. Had a lot of retirements, and then also with the nonpartisan redistricting commission, that also led to a lot of retirements as well. I hear some people have told me this is the most new members in one session in about 160 years. Focus this year mainly was on K through 12 education, and then also the possibility of a basketball hockey arena in Northern Virginia and Alexandria. There was also some focus on more funding for WMATA, but then also gun control and civil rights took center stage. Overall, not really a busy year for public transportation or rail, but we did have some important changes. We did have the biennial budget pass on time, so they did adjourn on the 60-day mark. And we do have some of these funding for transit priorities are tied to some of the bigger priorities. I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, but this is just gives you a glimpse of what we were looking at in terms of bills that were impacting us. And I mentioned Miriam, I'll give her credit for this fancy thing she did with my slides here. You can see some of the bills that passed, HB 201, which requires rather than permits that House of Delegate members have to serve on NVTC and VTA and PRTC. We have the bus shelter bill, HB 285. I'll go into more detail about that in a bit. HB 1425, that's more on the rail side, but that's a bill that our sister agency, the Virginia Passenger Rail Association, pushed for. And then we have SB 670, which is now a study that impacts the Virginia Railway Express and providing them an exemption from the surplus line broker tax. So moving to my next slide, what we call the bus shelter bill. May not seem like on the surface that would impact you all in funding, but under the Transit Ridership Incentive Program, one of the eligible projects is bus shelters and passenger amenities. This looked to solve a problem with building bus shelters on state-owned right-of-way. Those shelters have to go to the Department of General Services for review and approval. And what we were seeing is that those shelters were taking years to be built just because the approval process was taking that long. Our friends over in Charlottesville can talk of instances where 2-3 years passed before a bus shelter could even get started being built. So what this bill does is take the review process away from the Department of General Services and moves it over to the local building official. Local building officials are already reviewing bus shelters when it's built on local or private-owned property. So it makes sense to make the process uniform, whether it's local property or state-owned property. Right now, the bill only has this would only be in effect for 1 year. So starting July 1 of 24, running through June 30th of 25. So we'll see what the governor does with that bill. He has until April the 8th to make any changes to legislation. But we're expecting that we may have to do a mid-cycle grant for the Transit Ridership Incentive Program in FY25, just because we think a lot of transit agencies will want to move forward with building bus shelters with this new process. Going to my next slide, WMATA funding. I'm sure many of you all know WMATA is facing a significant budget shortfall, mainly due to the federal government not mandating that workers come back into the office on a consistent basis. Ridership is still about, I think, 70% of what it was pre-pandemic, is growing substantially year over year, about up 20%. Still not where it was before the pandemic, though. So with that shortfall, the General Assembly has placed $65 million in general funds in FY25 and $84.5 million in FY26 to help make up that shortfall. Maryland has committed $150 million to the shortfall. I think DC is going to come in at about $200 million. And this would cover half of Virginia's share of the shortfall. In addition to the funding, the budget amendment suspends the 3% cap that is currently in code. Right now, Virginia's operating subsidy to WMATA can't grow no more than 3% year over year. The budget amendment waives that for FY25 and FY26. And the bill also directs WMATA to study its cost and compare it to similar transit agencies nationwide, like San Francisco, New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, and report back to the General Assembly. Another piece of legislation was Senate Joint Resolution 28, which sets up a joint subcommittee to look at transit funding in Northern Virginia, not just WMATA, but also VRE and the transit systems that are served by NVTC and PRTC. This will look at revenue sources for operating and capital, areas to save money, and DRPT, as well as some other entities, will be providing staff support. The study committee is going to report back to the General Assembly twice. First time, it will provide a report in January of 2025, and then produce a final report in January of 2026. So it'll be interesting to see what they come back with. And my last slide is just a look ahead. So in about 2 Mondays, on April the 8th, that's the deadline for the governor to act on legislation, including the budget. So everything I've discussed has not been finalized yet. The governor still has his opportunity to review, make amendments, make vetoes possibly to some of these items. April 17th will be the reconvened session where the General Assembly returns to town, where they act on his amendments and vetoes. And then July 1st is when the FY25 calendar begins. And then we'll start all over again later that month and get ready for the 2025 session. So that's the latest from the General Assembly. I'm happy to answer any questions the committee has.
Thanks very much, Andy, for that comprehensive report. I'm very excited about the legislation that would allow us to make some speedier progress on bus shelters, something very much needed in our area. Anybody have any questions for Andy?
Kate, I'd be interested. You have any thoughts on the studies?
So I think we're really happy to see that there will be a legislatively sort of organized study helping us make the case for dedicated funding for transit up here in Northern Virginia. It's going to be very active. I know some of the dynamics that we're mindful of is there's no additional funding provided for this. I think there's a $25,000 to pay for legislative services. So honestly, so we're going to be, obviously, many of us working very closely with those staff down at Senate Finance and House Appropriations on putting this all together. I think that we are really happy to see the level of participation. There's a technical working group that has a very broad participation in it, as well as then the actual subcommittee that makes recommendations. It'll be a very busy next 6 months and then next year. But I do think it's really a promising way to put together the pieces for what we need for not just WMATA, but for all of our systems who are facing those same budget challenges where revenues are not capturing the needs or effectively paying for the needs of those transit systems.
Good. Are you hearing any discussion at all about any changes in the language of that as the governor looks at it?
So my understanding is this, as a joint resolution, it's done. There's no governor action required.
That is
Okay,
correct,
well,
yeah. Resolutions.
So
don't
it's sort of
require-
ready to go. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Well, even if the turnover in the legislature has been enormous, we're fortunate to have a number of veteran members of our committee to be out there working on these issues. And Andrew, thank you so much for your presentation. And I think we turn it over now to Zach.
Yes, sir. I'm back. So we just wanted to have a quick recap of just to remind everyone where we landed on the fiscal year 2024 SIP. And so Jayla, we're on slide 11. Okay. So the next one. So just a reminder, this is what came out of the fiscal year 24 SIP. Most important to you all is obviously the 133 million in operating assistance and 100.8 million in capital. And the reason we even wanted to mention this today is because that did include, as we'll show a little later, and we'll be talking about over the next little while, that included some what we might call uplift funding, just various things that came out of some pandemic relief and things like that. So that's kind of working its way through our program still in little ways. So it was still around last year and is a little less in play this year. So the next slide, Jayla. And this was a slide we provided at the end of our meeting last year. And so we had said at the time that operating revenues were going to return to normal levels. That did turn out to be the case. And as you can imagine, transit agencies have not necessarily seen a boon in revenues, other revenues as well. So you know, again, we're just bringing this up to kind of remind that this is actually playing out. We're still we're still looking at our revenues here as we put together our draft 6-year plan to see if we can, you know, provide, you know, some relief in that respect. But that is something that has come to pass. And we also talked about the direct allocation from VRE, which we'll talk about in a second as well. So, and then we put up web grants together. So we were quite prescient in things we said last year. So we're working through them, but so I'm going to throw it over to Dan right now to tell you about some of our transit performance. Did y'all have any questions about those couple of slides? I mean, it was kind of just from last year. So if there's anything, if
Any
not, I'll
questions?
throw it over to Dan to talk. Yes.
Any questions for Zach? Zach, do you have a sense of how much reduction we'll see as COVID money it just eventually disappears, I assume?
We will talk about that in a couple of slides if you could hold that
Okay,
question.
that's fine.
For
Sure.
a tad bit, yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, I assume the lack of questions is my cue to start. Good morning, everybody. Lovely to be back with you all today. I'm going to just speak to the next few slides here, which are an illustration of our transit ridership throughout the state over the period of calendar year 2023. So if you could proceed to the next slide, please. you. So this slide here illustrates ridership reported directly by transit agencies for the entirety of calendar year 2023 for WMATA, VRE, and then the rest of the Virginia agencies summarized separately. In 2023, a total of 115.4 million transit trips were taken on all services provided by all agencies. And that number is in the very bottom right corner of this complicated slide here. And so all of the other data points on here are, monthly breakdowns, kind of categorical breakdowns, but that is the top line number for 2023, which is great. It compared to the last 2 fiscal years, this compares highly favorably. I'm sorry, I keep saying fiscal. I'm so used to fiscal years. We're dealing with calendar year here. So in calendar year 21, we had a total of just 65 million trips on all modes. And in 2022, we had a total of 90 million. So this uptick was quite large over the past year, and we're all quite happy to see those numbers. So in 2023, about 64.5 million of these trips were taken on WMATA services, and that of course includes Metro Bus, Metro Rail, and Metro Access, their paratransit service. On VRE trains, 1.5 million trips were taken, and 49.5 million trips were taken on other bus, light rail, ferry, demand response services, and others provided throughout the state. Next slide, please. So each month we provide this summary of ridership. That's the most recent reported month, as well, kind of comparing the most recently reported month to previous years to the CTB and other committees. And this just gives us an idea about how the kind of year-over-year ridership changes or has been changing since the COVID-19 pandemic. And so for all of these groups, year-over-year ridership is increasing at a pretty steady rate since the low years of COVID-19. For Virginia agencies that do not include WMATA and VRE, ridership was 11% higher in December of 2023 than it was the prior year, which equals about 86% of pre-pandemic levels for those agencies. VRE ridership was 12% higher than in 2023 than it was in 2022 for the month of December, and that represents about 32% of pre-pandemic levels. And WMATA ridership was 27% higher in December of 23 than 22, which was about 61% of pre-pandemic levels. And so although we're not back up to where we were in calendar year 19, we are still seeing year-over-year growth across all of our modes in all areas. And I believe that is my last slide here. Are there any questions on this?
Great. Anybody have questions for Dan? So Dan, just to kind of at the top line here, the agencies outside of the Northern Virginia area and those that are not part of WMATA or VRE are showing a pretty substantial movement back toward pre-pandemic levels, and we're seeing good growth in the Washington metropolitan area as well.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
VRE
is still an issue in terms of are we continuing to see steady growth on VRE?
Yeah, year over year we are still seeing growth. Wouldn't characterize it as an issue, but the ridership is still low compared to pre-pandemic levels. And a lot of that has to do with what we spoke about a few years ago and last year as well, which is, a lot of the captive ridership for VRE is our federal government employees. And other employees also in Washington, and with the move towards telework and other modalities of working, it's just come back slower than other modes.
Anybody else have any questions?
Well, Mr. Chair, if I could just to make a comment, I think it'll be very interesting when we look at our first quarter. Obviously, this is through the end of the calendar year. There's every day, every week, like Metro's breaking ridership levels. So there is a lot of movement, whether it be Pentagon or other places, to be returning folks a lot more back in the office. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see the trends this quarter and then through this year when it comes to ridership trends in the DC area, because it is definitely ticking up.
Great. Great. Okay. Thank you, Kate. All right. And any other questions for Dan? Dan, is there any indication of, I don't know if you would have a sense of this, but there are some systems that have gone fare free. Have they shown a differential return rate or not?
So yeah, that's always a tough question, because I think the answer likely with that is that some have not. We did a little bit of sensitivity testing a few years ago, or maybe last year on that, and what we saw was that going fare free, although over the long haul of multiple years, may not have increased ridership more than other agencies, their return to pre-pandemic levels was faster than other agencies. And so some of those agencies that did not go free have taken a long time to get there. Some that did go fare free kind of showed those increases within one fiscal year.
Great.
Yeah.
So again, that's not across the board. Oh, please, Jen, please jump on in here.
Just gonna jump in. I think there are a couple of stories in the ridership that are particularly notable from my perspective, and that's, Greater Richmond Transit Company here in Richmond, Dash and Alexandria, which are both setting, not only have returned to pre-pandemic levels, but are setting new ridership records for their systems. And I think it's a combination of factors. It's not just that both of them happen to be fare free, but both of them have also happened to do a lot of work on the structure of their system and their route and how their services are provided. So I think it's a combination of things, but we are seeing a number of systems that are well outpacing their pre-pandemic ridership, and then others that are lagging behind. And so, Dan's going to give you the real scientific answer. I'm going to give you probably the more the softer, more maybe policy oriented answer, and that we've got a lot of really good stories to tell around the state with transit systems. And when you have a performance-based formula, those folks that are doing really, really well stand out. And the ones that have struggled from a ridership perspective, that shows in how those numbers line up. And but that's something that, like Dan said, we share these numbers on a monthly basis with the Commonwealth Transportation Board now. And so it's out there, it's on our open data portal, it's very transparent, and you can drill down and look at individual agencies' performance data over time. So that's a tool and a resource that's out there for you as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Jen. That's really helpful too. All right, any other questions for Dan, or any comments anybody would like to make?
Chair, this is Cindy.
Yes, Cindy.
Just a comment, I think, and Jen was touching on what I was thinking about. It's such a complex issue with a lot of variables that feed into that. And I know looking at the sort of the WMATA area and Northern Virginia with the fare free, that's a piece, but also the focus on fare evasion, bringing in revenue and offsetting that so that we're getting proper accounting of people who are riding the system. But then also, at least WMATA as part of the budget, Gap Solutions looking at raising some fares. So it's going to be interesting as all those factors run into it, sort of where do we see ridership, and as Kate said, it's increasing, but how does it play out in terms of number of people and revenues, and then, oh yes, there's the whole WMATA bus redo effort going on to really do a better job of looking at routes like we've seen some of our other systems do. So thanks just for the chance to throw more vegetables and pieces into the soup.
Thanks very much, Cindy, for the comments. Next on our agenda, I believe, is fiscal year 2025 operating capital projects. Projections, I'm sorry, projection.
Well said, everyone. Thank you. But yes, just wanted to get into real quickly, these are still, I mean, we're getting the draft set together, but we're still working to try to refine some of these projections. So Jayla, if you can switch to the next slide. There you go. All right. So as we always say, you know, we're still in the merit program, something that you all were obviously instrumental in creating. And so this is the 6th year of it. Jen Brule and I were talking the other day. It's a little unfair. I mean, July 1st, 2019, we know what came not long after. So it was only a short window of a chance to really run the program as it, without the pandemic kind of interceding. So we're still working with that. But as you all know, it's a prioritization, performance-based program, and it's still it's been a valuable contribution to what you just saw with ridership, working with our partners to provide some funding to help them operate and keep their systems up. So with that, next slide, Jayla. First, we'll talk about just where we're at with the last few years for capital assistance. And so you can see what we've done here is we've tried to, through colors, show that, we did have some significant uplift funding. So again, we're going to be kind of working through what a perhaps return to quote unquote normal is for funding in both the capital and operating as we go through the next several years. You all can kind of see where in 22 and 23, we still had, and all these years, we had a significant amount of uplift funding. So we've been able to pass that on, and some agencies have benefited from that. This year, it's obviously less than it has been, and some of that is just carryover from these other years. We mentioned how VRE this year coming up is no longer eligible, so they're getting potentially a 3.5% off the top from the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund. So, any questions about this slide? I mean, it's more just to show you sort of the trends and where we're at with. Everybody can kind of see what the new capital is there, but then what we've also had in terms of carryover and some extra revenues coming in.
Any questions or comments?
All right, Jayla, next slide. So, Mr. McGlennon, this was kind of what you mentioned about what are we really seeing in terms of where operating is dropping off. And so this is the same thing that we had through the CTB, some extra funds over the last few years to help deal with the pandemic. That has been decreasing over the last several years, obviously. And so, this year is down to its lowest level in the last several years. Mm-hmm. So we talked about it was 133. We just mentioned on one of the previous slides, it was 133 million for operating assistance back last year. That included some carryover, as you can see. And so we've got a little bit of funding carried over this year, that little green portion on the fiscal year 25 bar. And then we show what it would have been. 133 included VRE from before, so it's gone down a tad bit. It doesn't mean that everybody else would have gotten more or anything like that. So as you can see, 114 is what we would have had. 114 million or thereabouts is what we would have had, plus a little bit of carryover to apply to the operating formula this year. So that is, you can see that's a rather significant drop. I'll let Dan chime in with the numbers if he wants to, about how much a percentage drop. It's in the single digits, but it's still, for some people, that's a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So again, we're refining, we're doing some analysis of other revenues that we have that could potentially be put towards the operating formula this year to fix some of the drops, but we're not prepared right now, and that's why we want to meet next month, is to talk more about some specific decreases, and how some agencies and others are being affected by this after we get the draft SIP together and really see the impact of that. So, it's still a work in progress right now, but this is the high level picture, I guess you would say. So, happy to shut up if there's any questions right now, or if any of my colleagues had anything to add.
If I could, Mr. Chair, thank you, Zach, actually, because there was some confusion on that VRE number. So if I'm just hearing correctly, you're just trying to compare apples to apples because
Correct.
VRE is not in there. You just wanted to say, so it's not like DRBT is missing money. It's just allocated in a different process. Okay, good. There was a lot of confusion in looking at the slide. So,
we understand.
That said, I do want to put a pin in for maybe a future conversation, is to get a sense if you are hearing, as you guys are going through the SIP, is there the impact on collective bargaining agreements and their impact on operating costs throughout the Commonwealth? Because I think that's an important thing for us to be mindful going forward. So just because I had the mic, I want to put a little pin in that. If there's an opportunity to chat a little bit more about what you guys are seeing.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kate. That's an important consideration.
I would just start by saying, yes, I've certainly been talking to some of our operators that do have those union shops, that yes, there's been some obviously very tough negotiations and they were successful and have driven up our operating costs. But I'll also turn it over to Dan, maybe to address how that's playing itself out in the formula. Dan, if you're prepared to speak to that at all, you and I talked a little bit about that earlier.
Yeah,
what kind of impact that's having.
Insofar as collective bargaining agreements are increasing salaries, payments, benefits to drivers and other employees, it is increasing the operating costs of our agencies throughout the state. Now, I will remind you all that our operating formula allocations in any given year are based on the most recently audited operating budgets from our agencies. So for FY25, which we're creating right now as part of the SIP, we are looking at the FY23 audited budgets, which means that if there's been a lot of movement in FY24 and coming forward in FY25, that won't be reflected in our formula and in our calculations until a little further down the road. And so FY24 has been a big year for that. And so I anticipate that next year, operating costs for a lot of our agencies are going to go up even more than we've seen. So, but yeah, that's just a reminder of how our operating formula works. It's always a look back. But yes, it's certainly incorporated into the sizing metrics and the performance metrics that are compared across the state for the formula-based allocation.
And if I could do a follow on, do you have a sense of how many of the systems that DRPT funds do have collective bargaining agreements versus those that don't? And you don't have to answer that now, but I think that's going to be helpful as we understand sort of the impact on our transit systems and their costs. Because if the pot doesn't keep getting bigger and some have, I mean, as you said, there's a formula that may be beneficial to those who are costing more, but the reality is if those costs are substantial, the pots may not be getting big enough to be handling those increase in needs, right?
It's an excellent point, and no, I do not have a sense of how many of our agencies.
Okay,
have.
I think that's probably going to be helpful to understand moving forward. So
But
I know we're looking at what's happening here in Northern Virginia. So
yeah, I appreciate those comments, Kate. But I also think it's important for us to recognize as well that even in places that are not experiencing the impact of collective bargaining, wages are likely to have gone up substantially anyway, just to try to attract employees, just as we're experiencing at the county level in virtually every department, but especially in terms of transportation.
No, very good point, Mr. Chair. Absolutely.
Increasing costs across the board for capital and operating purposes. Yeah. It is having significant impacts.
If I could pivot away from the labor conversation and touch a little bit on how DRPT manages our programs. I think in 22, 23, and 24 on the slide, we were able to really clearly articulate where we got discretionary funding and uplift and saw some changes in the program. But in the 24 program, and you start to see it again in 25, you see carryover balance. And I just want to point out the really diligent work that the team does here to keep a good scrub on our program. When projects are completed and they have funding left on them, that money gets poured back into the program. The same thing goes with our agency operating budget. At the end of the year, I mean, we have returned a balance to the program. I know we've done it the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, we are driving as much money back into the program. So our team is still working on that as we try to put our fiscal year 25 6-year program and our agency budget, at least in a draft form, to bed. We're still cleaning up those old projects and making sure that we're making every dollar count for us. So I would just, I'm sure Zach said it already, but I'm going to reiterate it, that the numbers you see for 25 are the draftiest draft that you might see, and that they're going to, we were calling them the drafty draft yesterday. But we're continuing to work and sweep out the corners of the office and check between the sofa cushions so that we make sure that every penny that we can put towards the operating formula goes to the operating formula. And so it's our intent that what you will see, I want to emphasize that, because what you will see in the draft that gets released in mid-April will look a little different than that. In a, hopefully in a positive direction, but this is where we started from. And so as we finish that up, just know that when we press on our transit agencies to close out completed projects and to deobligate funding, it is for those funds to go back into our operating formula. So we'll keep doing that.
Well, thanks very much for that, Jen. I think everybody appreciates the tremendous amount of work that that you all do and that the systems do in trying to make sure that every dollar gets spent most efficiently. And I know this is the time of year everybody's always looking through every seat cushion they can find for any loose change to get into the kitty. So we really do appreciate the diligence. Any other questions or comments?
I will just point out here before we move to the next slide, which I will be presenting on the next slide also, just for consistency, the small green swatch on FY25 should indicate $3 million. So it's about 117 total that we're showing there. And so that's what we'll see on the coming slides as well, just to be consistent.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Well said, everyone. So Dan, I'll actually do this one, and then you can hit the next one.
Okay.
So as we were talking about, this is just a high overview of what we see as available this year, and what we're fitting, the various requests into that come from our transit agency. So there is a little bit more than that 114 that would come out of a normal just allocation from the CMTF, because we have a couple of $1 million, as Dan just said, almost $3 million in leftover carryover funding. So with that, if there are no questions on that particular slide, we kind of just went over that in a little more detail. I'll throw it back over to Dan if you all are ready to move on.
Right. So over these next couple slides, I'm just going to reiterate how our operating assistance formula works, what goes into it, and how our capital program also works, and what goes into the prioritization process. So just a reminder here that the state operating allocations every year are based on a performance-based formula that utilizes 5 key metrics that are spelled out here in the middle of the slide. We look at passengers per revenue hour, passengers per revenue mile, and we look at 3 cost-based performance metrics, which are operating cost per hour, operating cost per mile, and operating cost per passenger. And using those, we distribute the total amount of funds that we have in a given year, which, as mentioned on the previous 2 slides, was projected to be about $117 million this year, before looking through the couch cushions to find kind of other ways to support this. And again, here, I mentioned this a moment ago, recipients can receive up to 30% of eligible operating expenses based on the most recently audited fiscal year. So the FY25 allocations are really based on the financials provided to us for FY23. Any questions on this slide before I move on? All right, next slide, please. All right, then for the capital assistance program, CTB helped us to develop a prioritization process for capital projects that we've been running since fiscal year 20, which was 2019, to provide more objective decision-making criteria to our project evaluation and scoring process. You all will recognize the 3 project categories that are here on this slide. We sort projects into 3 types, including state of good repair, or SGR, minor enhancements, and major expansions. State of good repair projects are really those projects that replace or rehabilitate existing assets. And the evaluation of projects in that program is really based on transit asset management principles, including requirements that are put forth by transit asset management regulations set forth by the FTA. The minor enhancement program includes small expansion projects and kind of grouped SGR projects as well that are based on service impact factors of operating efficiency, frequency, and reliability, amongst a few other metrics that we'll look at on the next slide. And then the major expansion program is a much more involved evaluation process where we score projects based on 6 different factor areas. Those include congestion mitigation, economic development, accessibility, land use, environmental quality, and safety. And those do reflect the same factor areas of the larger VDOT Smart Scale program. Questions on this?
Anybody have any questions? Nope.
And so the next 2 slides get a little bit more into the specifics of scoring. If you could please advance. So for capital state of good repair projects, we derive scores for funding from 3 separate areas. The asset condition score, which accounts for up to 60 points, the service impact score, which accounts for up to 40 points, and something that we call incentive scores, which account for up to 10 points for projects, all adding up to a technical score that can equal a total of 110 points maximum. And so the asset condition score is really where we implement these transit asset management principles, and we derive this score, which makes up the majority of the overall technical score, from comparing age and mileage to expected useful life of the assets that are being replaced. And so this usually is vehicles, and so that's why it's usually age and mileage. But for assets that are not vehicles, we just look at age compared to the ESL for age or the useful life for age. The service impact score is a much more qualitative scoring mechanism where we sort projects into about 15 or 16 different project type categories and assign scores based on qualitative characteristics of that project type. Those scores are derived by looking at 4 different areas, and those include operating efficiency and the impact on operating efficiency, of course, frequency, travel time, and reliability, accessibility and customer experience, and safety and security. And so each of the project types derive a default score, which is like I said, a much more qualitative score that is added to the asset condition score. And then the incentive score is added on top of that. And this is where we look at some priorities of DRPT and of the TSDAC that we implemented a few years ago to reward projects that are going after certain policy initiatives that we have here. So zero emissions technology, innovation and technology, and safety and comfort around customer facilities are 3 focus areas that we've been really trying to support through our capital program. And each of those can lead to an additional 5 points per category with a maximum total of 10 points. So if you qualify for 3 of those, the project only receives 10 points in that category. And then the final group in the incentive score is agency accountability. And that's where we're able to track some requirements that we have imposed on our transit agencies throughout the states to comply with TDP, Transit Development Plan, and Transit Strategic Plan updates, as well as reporting asset status and mileage within our Trans-Am asset management system. So between those 3 areas of asset condition score, service impact score, incentive score, we get the technical scores here. Next slide, please. For minor enhancements, the scoring is simpler. It is the latter of the latter 2 of the 3 areas that were mentioned on the previous slide. So minor enhancements are scored solely on the basis of service impact score, which is that qualitative category-based score, and the incentive scores that I just mentioned, for a total of up to 50 points. Next slide, please. And finally, as mentioned, the major expansion scoring looks at 6 different focus areas or factor areas where we, for most areas, we look at 1 primary measurement. For accessibility, we actually look at 2. But so for congestion mitigation, we look at change in peak period transit ridership attributed to the project, which we use as a proxy for taking cars off the roadway. For economic development, we look at consistency with regional and local plans for economic development and support for local development activity. For accessibility, we look at both project improvement and accessibility to jobs and select non-work destinations. And we look at disadvantaged populations of low-income, minority, limited English proficiency groups that are within walking distance of a certain project, or within access of a certain project. For the safety area, we look at projects and how they contribute to improving safety and security, reducing the risk of fatalities and injuries. For environmental quality, we look at the reduction in daily vehicle miles traveled resulting from the project. And for land use, we look at how the land use surrounding a given project is supportive of transit and transit use. And so that is a much more involved scoring mechanism than the other two categories. And it provides us with a really holistic view of how these big projects work. Next slide, please. All right, and that is the end of my presentation here. Do you all have any questions on how the operating and capital programs, how the mechanisms of the scoring function, or how the formula for operating works?
Any questions for Dan?
All righty, seeing none, I will kick this over to Grant.
Thanks very much.
All right. So on the next few slides, I'll provide an overview of the FY25 grant applications that we received through our various funding programs. Overall, it was a pretty typical year in terms of the volume of applications, so no big surprises there. So I'm just gonna, just give you guys an overview of what we received. Jayla, can you actually flip to the last slide, please, on the capital applications? Yes. So in FY25, we received 430 individual project applications for capital assistance. In total, that equated to roughly $114 million in terms of a total state funding request. As well, we had $17 million and change worth of requests for state-controlled federal funding. So this is the 5339 funding that comes to DRPT that we suballocate typically to our small urban transit agencies. So the table at the bottom of this slide just breaks that out into a little bit more detail and separates it into those different buckets for capital assistance. As you can see here, and as is typical every year, the capital program is mostly state of good repair. So we did receive almost 300 individual project applications for state of good repair projects, almost totaling $70 million worth of state funding and $11 million worth of state-controlled federal funding. The next largest bucket was our minor enhancements bucket. We received 129 project applications through that for a total ask of $30.6 million in state funding and $4.1 million in state-controlled federal funding. Do be aware that the minor enhancements bucket does include some state of good repair like projects. We just could not put them in the state of good repair bucket because they do not have a useful life. And so we score them as a minor enhancement, but we do flag them as a state of good repair project as we are moving through the prioritization process. And then the last bucket here on major expansions, we received two major expansion applications this year. Both were facility projects, one in Arlington and one in Williamsburg. The total ask for state funding for those two projects was $14.3 million, and the total ask for state-controlled federal funding was $1.8 million. So that's kind of.
I'm sorry, could you just give an example of one of those minor enhancements that doesn't have a life span?
Dan knows all the details. I can give one that I'm aware. I mean, it could be like replacing seats or something like that. Passenger
Okay.
seats in a bus, or like it doesn't have a useful life, but it
Mhm.
is the replacement of an existing asset. I'm sure Dan can think of better examples though. If you want to chime in.
For examples, I don't know, but I have lots of them. So this could be, for example, also a package of SGR related purchases that are to replace um, assets in the future. So, for example, our agencies like to buy spare parts. Spare parts
Uh-huh.
projects usually consist of multiple items that don't necessarily have a state determined useful life.
Right.
And
So it's going to
so
go into a vehicle that may be close to state of good repair replacement, but maybe not.
exactly. So like you could think of like alternators or even transmissions. A
Mhm.
lot of agencies like to have a few spares of those around for when something goes wrong.
Great.
And which
Thanks.
is really a state of good repair investment, but it's not associated with a specific asset.
Right. Thanks. I appreciate that.
No problem.
And in that vein, I think the bulk, and Dan, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think the bulk of minor enhancements actually end up being just like that. They're state of good repair in nature. We just have to classify them technically as a minor enhancement.
Yeah,
So-
it's about half, if not slight majority.
Mhm.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay.
So before I move over to our next program, any questions on capital assistance applications? Right, hearing none. Jayla, if you could flip to the next slide, please. So this is a summary of our special programs and the applications that we received. So we received 59 individual project applications this year for a total ask of $15 million. You can see the various special programs listed in the table below. And I'll just go through them one by one here very quickly. Technical assistance, these are typically studies and plans, so planning projects. And we always receive a fair number of these because transit agencies are required to either complete a transit strategic plan or a transit development plan every so often. So 25 applications through our TA program is not atypical. The ask there was $3.6 million. Next line, demonstration assistance. There are two kind of sub buckets under this program. Demonstration assistance will fund not only new services, new transit services, like pilot projects, but it will also fund innovation and technology projects. So this year we only received 6 demo applications, but it was a healthy total ask of $6.6 million. Next program here on the list, workforce development. We received 14 applications through this program for $582,000. These are typically smaller projects, and historically this program has been called our intern program. But during COVID, we kind of rebranded and broadened this program to be called a workforce development program. So really, we wanted to shift this more towards more blue collar type apprenticeships and not as many white collar office internships. So we were happy to see a number of those more apprenticeship style applications come in this year. We also broadened it to include some just trainings, any sort of training opportunities for existing staff for our transit agencies. So we saw a number of those applications as well. These last 2 programs listed here, these are our 2 commuter assistance programs. These are technically funded through our special programs bucket. I don't know if we've ever actually brought this to this group, but just to be consistent in terms of the SIP, it is these 2 project types are classified under special programs, and these are our CAP operating and CAP project assistance programs. Total, it looks like about $5 million, $5.5 million or so, if I'm doing the math correctly, and almost 30 applications between those 2 buckets. So any questions on special programs? Right, Jayla, if you could flip to the next one, please. So now I'll go over our Transit Ridership Incentive Program, also referred to as TRIP. So Jayla, if you could hide the teams, thank you. So TRIP is our newest program, as I think you all know. It did go through some changes, not this most recent General Assembly session, but the General Assembly session before that in 2023. That General Assembly session created 2 new project categories under TRIP. So it was originally just regional connectivity projects and fare-free or subsidized fare projects. But the 2023 General Assembly session added passenger amenity eligibility, as well as public safety and crime prevention eligibility. So we had a number of applications under the TRIP program this year. You can see kind of the breakout in the table below. Only a few regional connectivity applications were submitted this year. Only one fare-free application was submitted this year, but we had a number of passenger amenity applications, 24 to be exact, for a total of $15.8 million requested. And then we had a few public safety and crime prevention applications as well. One thing for this group to just be aware of, with the addition of these 2 new categories, we now have a situation where both the capital program as well as the TRIP program, there's some dual eligibility. So sometimes we might receive an application under our capital program, but if the capital funding is tight and it's a really good project and we want to fund it, we might throw it over to TRIP if it has dual eligibility and maintain the same match rates as we would have funded it through the capital program. We have that flexibility now with TRIP because of this dual eligibility. Same thing goes with like technical assistance grants. Sometimes it might be a study to review bus stops or something like that in the system. And if our special programs budget is tight, but we have flexibility under TRIP, we would kick it over to TRIP under the passenger amenities sub-program. And again, our goal is to maintain those match rates, so we're not essentially competing with ourselves between TRIP and all these other programs. So I did want you all to just be aware, and for those of you who are actual transit operators on the line, you might have requested an application through capital or technical assistance or something like that, but you might actually see the project come up under TRIP. So I wanted to just make sure you all were aware of that as we get together our 6-year improvement program. I will pause there, and if you all have any questions about TRIP, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions anybody has for Grant at this point? All right, I guess we can move on.
All right, we're moving. Next slide, which I think is my last slide. Yes. So this is another program where I'm not sure that we've provided a whole lot of information to this group. It is a bit of a special grant program that we do administer. This is our FTA 5310 Enhanced Mobility Program. 5310 funding is intended for individuals with disabilities as well as seniors. So we do have a number of grantees that get this funding through us. And you might also see either in the SIP or on our website, we refer to this funding program as human service transportation, sometimes also as specialized transportation. But it is under FTA's Enhanced Mobility 5310 program. So I'll just jump to the table down below. This is pretty typical that we see every year. We get applications for vehicles. We get other capital applications. These are for usually mobility management applications to do coordinated rides. And then we also get some traditional 5310 operating applications. This isn't a whole lot of money that we're dealing with. It's roughly $10 million, a little bit less than that. But I guess the big difference on the 5310 program is on the transit side, we have 39 transit agencies. Everyone gets operating. Everyone typically applies for capital, and then with demo and some of these other special programs, it's a little bit more variable. But it's kind of the same players in our program every year. With 5310, it's kind of different. We get a different group, especially for capital vehicles, each year. And so that's really one of the big differences of the program. Also, these agencies are much, much smaller. So these are often AAA agencies or agencies that deal with aging services. So again, a totally different group, but we do support them through this program. Yeah, so this is my last slide, but I'm also happy to take any questions if you have them.
Great, thank you, Grant. Anybody have any questions or comments?
This is Jamie. I just had a quick question. Do y'all do any debriefing for any of the agencies that don't get those grants that they applied for, or only if they ask them, or how do they know how they can improve for the next round?
Is this generally for all applications and all programs, or are you specifically asking for one of them?
No, all of them, because you just went through a couple of the merit programs. You went through the TRIP grant program, so specifically related to those two in particular.
Yeah, we are happy to do a debrief at request. We do them every year for a handful of agencies that always want to get a sense as to why some of their applications were approved and others rejected. And I do think it is good practice for us to do debriefs with agencies, because the whole goal is to help you guys, as you're preparing your applications for next year, improve them. So in those conversations, we typically try to give you some tips and pointers on, what we're really looking for as we're reviewing grant applications. So would highly encourage all transit agencies to reach out to us and request those debriefs.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, I have a question, as I just was able to pull up the slides from before. When it comes to the capital requests and the special programs requests, if I'm doing the math correctly, it is, well, maybe you can tell me, you presented who's applied. So do you have a sense of, sort of the magnitude of applications versus funding available, knowing that you're able to move some stuff around TRIP, sort of managing expectations for what's been applied for versus what's the available funding, granted, knowing that whatever needs to be eligible, of course.
Yeah. So Dan and Zach and others, feel free to chime in here. I'll start on the capital side. I believe if you can actually flip back, Jayla, a few slides.
Yeah, slide 21 has a nice summary of the numbers, which I appreciate, but then I know compared to the applications would be helpful.
Yeah. Jayla, if you can go to slide 27, please, which I think is capital. You can see that, when you combine both state and federal funding, it's roughly $131 million worth of requests, of requested funding. In state funding for capital, I believe we have $90 million available and $20 million of state-controlled federal. So obviously more requested funding than we have available.
But not substantially.
Not substantially.
Probably about
no.
5-10%.
No.
Okay.
Yep, exactly. And that, I don't think that's atypical really either. I know that the last few years have been a little unique because we've had all this uplift funding. And so we typically have to draw the line of what we consider as a good project. And we've never really, again, the last few years, had to worry about available revenues. This year, we had to keep a closer eye on available revenues for sure. Because we didn't have as much of that uplift funding. On on the TRIP side, Jayla, if you could flip one or two, yeah, one more, please. So TRIP is a little bit different. We have a substantial carryover balance here. And so this is where we have the flexibility. And so we did, and Dan, I don't know if you're, I know you don't manage the TRIP program, but I believe those 24 applications that we received under passenger amenities, we flipped over many of them from capital, just because we were starting to get pretty tight on the capital side, and we had the flexibility over in TRIP. And of course, you know, they have to be good projects in order for us to do that. But yeah, I don't know, Dan, if I know you were involved in that, if you want to speak to that a little bit more.
Certainly. So, yes, all of the, not all of them, but the majority of the 24 in passenger amenities, and if not all, 2 out of the public safety and crime prevention listed on here came from the capital program originally. And so of note there is that these requested totals are after we did the shifting, right?
Oh,
so
okay.
meaning the 113 million of capital request was after we shifted other ones over to the TRIP program.
Okay, that's very helpful.
Okay. Right, so it was
And
to
so the number that's
illustrate
associated here are the ones that have been shifted already.
that's correct. And so
Thank you.
on the capital side, I would say like the takeaway from that is that we had about 90 million in state capital, but 113 million of request after all of the shifting. And so that's a key piece there.
Yeah, and I think just helpful insofar this happens, you know, next year, whatever. That's actually a really helpful thing just to have on the slide. This is how much available. This is applied. Keeps it so we don't have to jump up back and forth. Just thank you.
Yep, that makes sense.
And actually, so the last thing, of course, is then, if I read correctly, the special programs is greatly oversubscribed. Yes?
So special programs, we definitely received way more applications this year in terms of funding requests. Okay. But if you could actually, what was the slide, Kate, on available funding?
Available funding is 21 on the slide deck. So you say that you've got 6.5 million in special programs available. So it looks like it's 15 million in applications for 6.5 million. And there we go.
Zach, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the 6.5 does not include our carryover, does it?
Right, correct. Yeah, that was just new. That was new funding at that point. Yeah, we did have some carryover.
Okay.
Yes. So, and I think the carryover, I'm sorry, Zach, what did you say?
No, I said, yeah, that didn't include the carryover on that one. Yeah.
I want to say the carryover, we had $8 to $9 million worth of carryover. So a pretty fair amount. So at the end of the day, yeah, we were right at about the requested amount, comparing it to how much we had available.
Now, thank you. This is really helpful. I mean, I know this is every year, but we also know that, as you mentioned, things are going to start getting a little bit tighter because we don't have the uplift. So as all of our jurisdictions are putting together their own budgets, just having a little bit of predictability, and it sounds like things are pretty much could be close to what they applied for, is going to be very helpful. So thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Mr. Chair, I have a question real quick about the applications that transferred from the capital to the TRIP program because of that dual eligibility. Are those applications that are in TRIP that would have been eligible under capital, would some of that state controlled federal be able to follow them? And the reason I ask that question is a lot of the small urban agencies rely on that state controlled federal to be able to carry forward those capital projects. And with the implementation of merit, that reliance on the flex highway funds went away, and it turned toward the state controlled federal.
So I can get started on the answer to that, and Dan, feel free to chime in here. I think with these dual eligibility projects, our goal was to keep the match rates of any DRPT controlled funding consistent when you flip over to TRIP. That does not mean that the 5339 DRPT controlled 5339 would actually go into the TRIP program, but rather we would, and I'm just using hypothetical, if Blacksburg applied for a passenger amenity project that had dual eligibility and they wanted 68% state, 28% DRPT controlled federal, and 4% local match. If we flip that over to TRIP, we would fund it with TRIP funding at 96% state, TRIP funding, 4% local match. So we would keep you whole basically, but we would change the flavor of funding. And Dan,
Okay.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's what we intended to do when we were flipping things over.
We'll meet with Kathy in the office after that, I think.
Yes, that's correct. How you described it is exactly what we did. But I did hear somebody else speaking, I think, if there was another question.
Yeah, I was just going to respond and say, I think that, I mean, that addresses my question and concern. Small urban agencies are not concerned with the distribution between state and federal, just as long as that local contribution isn't impacted. So thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, should we move on? Public
All right,
comment.
so I think we'll throw, this one just should yeah, Jay, you're on the right slide, 31. I mean, this just tells you all what we're, what the next steps are for us to get the draft SIP together. And as we said, later in this meeting, before we convene, we'll try to see if we can get together a time soon after the CTB receives the draft SIP on April 16th that we can get together to talk about the operating and capital allocation program. So I will throw it over to Andy for public comment at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, so we are going to take public comment. So if you can just raise your hand. I think it's across the top screen. You'll see take control. I mean, chat people, raise your hand. Have a comment. Committee. Mr. Chairman, I'm not seeing anyone raising their hand.
Okay, well, going once.
Everybody's happy.
All right, terrific. So I guess the next question is, you've indicated what our the key moments that coming forward. You want to try to find some possible times. Is that what you're looking for, Zach?
I will leave that to y'all. I mean, if I don't want to keep y'all here all day, that's not our intention. So if you have, I indicated that it seems like Tuesdays, Thursdays are best. Our intent is to have something as soon after the CTB meeting as possible with all of you, or as many of you as possible, just so we can, it's fresh and we can talk about what's transpired and what we want to do and look at. So that is really the principle here. So if that meets with what you all are thinking, if we can arrive at something, that's great. If we need to think about it a little more, that's something I'll leave to y'all.
But what date is the CTB meeting?
It's April 16th, sir. Jen, that's correct. Jen, Andy, that's correct. They've moved it to one day there.
Yeah,
on
it's
the 16th,
one day,
so.
April 16th, and then the reconvened General Assembly session is the 17th.
Yeah.
Okay, so did you want to do it the 18th?
I mean,
Is
that's
that too
probably,
soon?
and a reminder, we did want to do this one in person. I will say that
Yes.
I've gotten out of local government sphere. I don't know what it is with remote participation potentially for any of you that may have conflicts and to make it a quorum. I'm not as well versed in that as I used to be. So that is something we can talk about, just so we can get a quorum and as many people can participate as possible. So certainly the 18th
I'm
is
very
possible.
familiar with that, Zach. You need to have it in person quorum, and then
Right.
others can join in, but you have to have that in-person quorum for even to allow them in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So whatever quorum consists, I don't know
Yeah.
what your quorum numbers are,
What's our
but that's
quorum,
going to be.
5?
It is.
Is it, if
is
it's just a
5,
simple
so yes,
majority?
sir.
Okay, So
Right.
5 people in
Mhm.
person, then others can
Right.
join remotely.
Okay.
Okay.
And I can be
So-
there in person on the 18th.
So Thursday, the 18th, is a possibility?
That doesn't work for me,
No?
unfortunately. No. How
Um,
about-
And
how long do you-
Chair, I was gonna note the 18th would work, but I would probably need virtual. The other date that I saw float was 23rd. That's a real problem for me, but if we could do the meeting earlier and either I don't carpool with Kate or we fly back, I actually have to be in Leesburg chairing a meeting by 4 o'clock that day, the 23rd. So that one is doable, but it's a little tighter depending on
Well,
my
so
carpool
how long
partner.
would you how much of an agenda would you anticipate on that day, Zach? Do you have a sense of how long the meeting would be?
I mean, we went about an hour and a half today or so. It could be, if we might be fortunate to get out here 11. I mean, we could. So yeah, that's.
The only reason I ask is because I do have a Board of Supervisors meeting at 1 o'clock that day.
that day as well. So if we want to look at
Right.
even the that next week, what would that be? One day would be the 25th, or
Right.
even if I think the latest we'd want to go even consider is probably that May 2nd or so. So April 30th is another one. So that's getting busy for everyone. And so
I could certainly do April 30th without a problem. I'd have to change something on April 26th, but I can do that.
How
I can
about
do
we,
the-
how about we do this? We can send out a doodle poll with
Yeah,
some dates
something like
and
that.
times, and then just let everybody respond to that.
That's fine.
Just because I could look at my calendar and I know when Kate's commission is, and I know when
right.
Transportation District Commission of Hampton Roads and is on the 25th. And so I think we're gonna run into a bunch of things,
Mhm.
and then 6-year plan meetings. And I mean, I do think Zach is right that if we can get in earlier, it would be better and maybe when we send that poll out, if you need to be virtual, then maybe we go back and reconsider whether we're in person or if we just do another all virtual. So we'll get something to you and let you respond, but I do think it's important to do it before that program gets stale, just because
Right.
it is gonna look, potentially different than what we've had over the past few years. And so I think it's important
But
that.
Kate, can more than
that
one
this group
person do
react to-
virtual? Can more than one person do virtual?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
If
So
you
I
had
mean,
if you had an in-person forum? Okay.
yeah, and I think you and Andy and I can talk about that, but I
Yeah.
think we can send something out and let people get a chance to look at their calendars, but
Yeah.
it's probably a 2-hour, not our long and drawn out TSDAC meetings when we were working on
Right.
the formula, but.
But with that in mind,
Unfortunately.
can you put the 19th on then? Because that would be close to the meeting. It's on a Friday, but I don't know how people look that day.
Uh,
And
You
also
teach on
with
Monday,
Seth-
Wednesday, Friday, Ms. Moon?
Some of those Fridays are VRE Ops Board, but that's okay.
Yeah. We'll
Yeah,
we'll get you something. We'll get you
Okay,
something to
okay.
react to.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll look at as many dates as we can. It's a busy time.
Okay.
to say the least.
Yeah, I was gonna say sooner the better, because it is a busy time for those of us doing local budgets. But I appreciate the flexibility in looking at options, and I
Mhm.
would agree that we should plan at least 2 hours. If we end early, that's great, but
Yeah, right.
could be a robust conversation between
Yeah.
General Assembly and the drafts.
Right.
Right. Okay, great. So I think that brings us then to the end of our agenda for today. Anybody has any comments they'd like to make now?
No,
If
just
not,
my only request is if we have, we have this meeting scheduled before Jen's last day, okay?
absolutely.
So there's the incentive to be there in person.
Yes,
Yeah, my last
Yeah.
day is my last day in the office is, well, last day here is going to be May 29th, and then last day working will be June 3rd and 4th. I'm committed to the Passenger Rail Authority for a couple of days.
Mhm.
We'll say mark your calendars for May 29th. We're going to have a nice little agency open house here. So welcome all of our
Okay.
friends to Richmond if you happen to be in the neighborhood.
Great. So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn for today.
so move.
So moved.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
All right.
Aye.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much,
everyone.
and look forward to seeing you all in April, hopefully in person, and get a chance to reconnect once again.
Okay.
Thanks. Take care,
Agreed.
everybody.
Thank you.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.